Hi, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of On the Field with here at Canisius School of Sports Injury and Rehabilitation. My name is Dr. Mo, and I have the pleasure of being on the field with Coach Paolo Pacione. Coach, hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for joining us today from Florida.
Yeah, it's nice being here in the sun.
No kidding, especially not being in the winter in Canada. I wish I was down there. Good choice of, I guess, occupation moving down south after all this time in Canada.
Yeah, it's been good.
So I'll just give a little quick background about how I know Coach Paolo and a little bit about his background, and then I'll allow him to give an introduction on his own. I know Coach Paolo from our days from the Ontario provincial days. I used to be a therapist with the provincial program, and Paolo used to be the fitness and performance coach both for the provincial and the national training center there. And we both worked at the CERC clinic there where Dr. Robert Grimmett is the director, and that's where we met. Since then, Paolo's gone to do wonderful things working with MLS teams and USL teams and the national program. So, Paolo, maybe you give a little brief introduction about yourself and maybe focus on your background going through your education, because I know there's going to be a lot of younger students and student athletes listening to this, and they're going to want to know how you got where you got to today, because some of them perhaps after soccer wanted to choose a career such as yours.
Well, you mentioned one of the first and most important parts was my time with CERC with Dr. Grimmett. He's the one that opened many doors for me from a very, very young age.
Yeah.
And it came from even just from shadowing, guys like you that were in school and at a young age, and then before you know it, a passion turned into a career.
And tell me a little bit about your, I guess, education in terms of going through undergrad and your certifications that you received in terms of becoming a performance and fitness coach.
So it actually starts a little bit before my undergrad. I actually got my hands a little bit dirty beforehand, getting your typical personal training certification. That way, you had some insurance to work. You had ideas that you wanted to put forth. So I started doing that. I was working with young teams and my brother's team at the time in Northwick, Missouri, and that's where it all began. And the passion was there, and then now it's like, okay, what are the next steps to really grow this passion to make sure it's something, can you really take it to the next level? At that time, there weren't really fitness coaches that were working full time, and I mean, even part-time businesses are very few and far between. But I believed in that model at that point. I mean, there was another company called Speed Factory at the time, and
Yes.
I said I want to do something like that. And it started. It started with one club, and then it became a few clubs, and then it became a few personal training clients. And before you knew it, while I was going to York University, I had an opportunity to leave and go work in Italy for a little while, and I took advantage of that opportunity as well.
You want to tell us a little bit about that experience in Italy?
So in Italy, I worked with a semi-professional club that had a youth system as well. My first experiences were with the youth team with a coach named Rafael Carvajal, which is a Canadian as well, who went over there and started his adventure and took me along with him.
Yeah.
We had some success with the youth to the point that we were both asked to come back and work with the first team. And so I stayed, and I mean, it interrupted my studies at the time at York University. I had great professors that supported me because I was worried at the time because I did take some time off before university and thinking, you know what, I want to make sure I get on track, do things properly. So for me to get off track once again, I thought it was going to be a struggle or a challenge. Mind you, the profs that I did speak to, they made it clear to me that there's no such thing as an opportunity like that, and you do not get off track when it comes to education. Education is an ongoing process. So go ahead and take that experience, and school will always be where it is, and in the meanwhile, you'll be studying. So I went to Italy. In the meanwhile, I actually did some certification courses there, so that way I could brush up on the Italian terminology. I did a personal training course there, and it was, before you know it, I spent 2.5 years there before I came back and finished my degree. And took more courses after that at York in the advanced fitness stream.
And I know you have a FIFA certification in fitness and performance training. When did you do that certification?
So what happened was when I got back from Italy, I started working with Dr. Grimmett again, and we set up a program with the Ontario Soccer Association that gave me opportunities to go and learn abroad. And what happened was I went to one conference in Trinidad and Tobago, and I met these gentlemen at the English FA who hosted a fitness trainers course. And a lot of professional associations in the world, they have courses dedicated for the fitness professionals, like in Italy, in France, in Spain.
Yeah.
So I found this connection, very important to me because it opened a door for me to go and take this course. And this course was over a 2-year period, just like a UFIA would be, with coursework and thesis in between. There was about 13 assessments over that time. And that course for me was really fundamental, putting all the theory from my time in university to the practical element that I had to apply.
And so while you were at the OSA and doing work with the national program, you're working with a lot of youth athletes and not the senior players. Tell me a little bit about how a fitness coach goes about, designing performance and training programs for the youth elite as athletes as opposed to a professional player.
So one of the most important things with the OSA program was the talent identification stream. So our testing combines that we created were very important to us in terms of understanding what athletes do we have in front of us, at what point in terms of their growth and maturation are they. So even when we're looking at testing results and stuff like that, we were also dividing the group within their maturation groups. So from there, it's teaching the fundamentals of training and giving them a comfort in terms of some of it was self-guided training because some of they weren't always with us. But when it was with me, a lot had to do with teaching and really building a foundation for professional aspirations or national team aspirations.
And then from there, you kind of moved on and went to the professional, I guess, sector where you did some work with MLS teams. You had a brief stint with Toronto FC before you moved on to Montreal Impact. Tell us about that experience, how it was, and what were the differences in terms of not only fitness program training, but the psychology of the athlete when it comes to fitness and performance. Because I assume it's a little different when you're working with youth players in terms of their motivation and psychology as compared to professional players.
Well, my time with TFC is when they first got off the ground. They were trying to build their staff and build their way of doing things. I was there in the first couple months, helping out as a support role. They didn't move forward with a full-time role in that position, so I didn't stay on board for longer than that. They did, learn from their mistakes, and then the following year hire a really good professional in Paul Winsper. And he really built the foundation for the club moving forward. So my time was dedicated between 2007 and 2012 with the OSA and the national team programs, and up until my time before leaving to Montreal with the first team, the Canadian national team. Going to Montreal, like you said, it is a little bit different. You're working with athletes day in and day out, where with a youth or with a national team program, you're not working day in and day out. And you're planning throughout the year instead of small segments here and there and tournament versus league. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we can spend a lot of time talking about all the different intricacies in that planning process.
Something that was really interesting to me was, there's a great picture of you there with Drogba, and Drogba came there later in his career. How did these players, players who are a little more seasoned and aged, such as Drogba and Nesta and the other guys who came there, how would they approach their fitness and performance?
A lot of it depends on their history and what their habits are like. A great example is Marco Di Vaio. For me, Marco Di Vaio was probably the most dedicated professional I've ever worked with, and it showed in a fitness session. He was showing up the young guys. And I asked him one day, I said, what made you realize that you had to work at this level and consistently for you to, have longevity in your career? And he said when he was a young player, at his time at Juve, looking at players like Nedved, Davids, they were machines training hard, and he realized that was the way to create longevity. And that's why at 37 years old, he had a 20-goal season. And that's because of his work. But Drogba, for example, he had a little bit of a lull before coming to us. I mean, in terms of playing time, in terms of surgery. So it was really important to make sure that his first steps were appropriate and building confidence in his return. And, and it proved successful. He did really well. Drogba is very dedicated to his preparation prior to and post training on a daily basis with his osteopath, his personal osteopath, and that's one thing you see the players that last as long as they do is because of the time that they
No, yeah,
spend.
exactly. It's about that long term, I guess, keeping on top of your diet and your fitness and realizing what things work and what things don't work for you. How much involvement, I guess, can you describe the role of the fitness coach on a professional team and how they collaborate with, let's say, the coaching staff?
So the styles that differ, and depending on what country and where and what coaching staff, the more common and more successful stream to me is when you're fully integrated. For me, a fitness coach is not separate from an assistant coach. It's just your responsibilities in terms of performance, and
Absolutely.
and your job is primarily assisting the technical staff in planning, devising an approach to ensure that the players are going to be at the best performance at any given time. One thing is looking at scheduling and understanding, when are the moments that you'll be able to work harder, and what does that mean, harder, and what are the moments that it's important to taper off in order to have the players at their best capacity.
And now you've made the move down to Miami, very wise choice with the fantastic weather, I guess, as a Canadian. And describe your role there and how's life different as compared to being up in Canada?
It's fantastic being down here in terms of weather. I mean, we don't worry about, okay, what's the weather going to be like? Well, except for hurricanes.
Yeah.
But what's the weather going to be like for the field in terms of, okay, but that's not actually true because we do have the other extreme where it's the heat that you have to deal with. Um, that really shapes our training and the way we go about training and what time we train at, how hard we train at certain periods of the year. These are all things that do influence your training. And in terms of planning of hydration, travel, because we are further south, some of our travels are a little bit longer, being us in the far corner that we're at. So yeah, there are different challenges. In terms of the working environment, I'm super happy to be assisting a guy like Alessandro Nessa, who's a coach that's going to have a formidable future. When you come on board as a hand-picked fitness coach, it makes a big difference because everything that we do is planned together.
Exactly.
When I went into Montreal, I went into a role where the coach was hired after me, so it was a building process. For Alessandro, the building process is a lot quicker because he knew what I was about, what I believe in, how I worked in the past. So it's been great.
So let's get into some, I guess, more detailed and hot topic issues. First I want you to, maybe perhaps define what soccer-specific fitness means to you and what your philosophy as a fitness coach is when it comes to training soccer-specific fitness.
For me, soccer-specific fitness is, and I'm going to talk about it in terms of at the professional level, is working within the philosophy of the team and the playing philosophy of the team. So that's obviously guided by the coach. Alessandro wants to play a lot, so when it comes to fitness, we got to talk about how we're going to make playing in relative to our improvements in our fitness capacities in each of the capacities.
Can you elaborate on those things, the capacity? So, for example,
So I'll
yeah,
give you an example. When you talk about speed endurance, so the ability to prolong high intensity action, how do you do that in play? So I'll give you an example. You're talking about the back line, let's say a back line of four. They might be under stress for a given period of time. So in terms of speed endurance, we're talking about actions that are lasting from 15 to 90 seconds.
hmm
You're going to have them under pressure for 30 seconds, whether it's shifting, whether it's coming out. And then that's designed based on how we designed the exercise. But we were able to attack that energy system development, in a tactical, in a playing sense.
And how does this differ when you're working with youth athletes in terms of developing soccer-specific fitness?
Well, working with youth athletes, the environment depends on how much time you have them. And if you don't have them a lot of time, you need to be as efficient as possible. Sometimes doing something within 5 minutes and not mixing themes is important, because you don't want to, confuse. You don't want to get bad habits playing and not achieving certain fitness capacities. But you can, if you keep things repetitive and simple and clean, you can. So obviously it takes a lot of practice in your application.
So there's this divide now among fitness coaches and soccer performance coaches. There's some, for example, like Raymond Verhazen, who he talks about how the soccer fitness has to be a component of the football itself. You can't separate the two. So he doesn't like isolated fitness training. He likes it to be as functional as possible. And he's been very critical of even Premier League coaches. Moyes got the end of it on some tweets a few years ago when Van Persie picked up some strains because he thought that Moyes was approaching his training sessions not as economically as possible. What do you think about this idea of isolated fitness training as opposed to more functional and integrated training?
Well, being in the environment, I know it's hard and not fair to judge anybody if you're not there. If you're not there and you see what happens on a daily basis, what the player does, what the player enjoys doing in terms of how do you get them to be their best. So that's another topic of discussion. In terms of what Verheyen is saying is, I understand and I do agree with him. I do agree with him, especially when you have limited time. You need to have it involved in the soccer elements as much as possible. But there are times and there are moments where separating the two, you might become a little bit more efficient. And you might look at it the other way as well. You might be more efficient in improving soccer capacities. It depends who do you have in front of you, what is the psychology behind what you're doing. I'll give you an example. Try to take away running 4 times 1,000 meters from an Italian soccer player. It's impossible. For them, that's how you develop aerobic power. Where a Spanish player would say, no, I'm going to get in my 5v5, 4v4s, and that's more than enough. So it all depends on what the situation is and who you're working with and who you're working for, and that will guide your approach.
Also, I think there has to be a balance of the two. I mean, there's times where you have to do the isolated work, and for younger, definitely for youth elite athletes, I think the more integrated approach is, I guess, better because they get more touches on the ball. I wanted to.
But the argument could be, what if those touches are poor and have poor habits? So, and that's where the balance has to be found, and where you say, okay, when are you giving more priority to one aspect versus the other? And again, let's not mix up, training for 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, maybe around there, versus the next spectrum. The next spectrum, you're in a professional stream at that point in time, where you are going to be spending more time training in general, so you might be able to split off some dedicated time to certain fitness aspects.
So it's fair to say for a fitness and performance coach, they should approach it context by context, depending on the player types, the psychology,
exactly,
the team, so on and so forth.
Exactly.
Yeah. What did you make of Pirlo's comment where he came out and said there was not enough soccer being played and there was too much running around in that
area? Being in a league, I understand where he's coming from and what he's saying. He's also a player, and that happens very often, a player who comes mid-season in MLS. There's an adjustment period, and you see it, his adjustment period. Now he's showing his best performances and he's showing who he is. I get what he means because the quality is different in terms of the technical ability and the physical ability than where he's used to or where he's from. And yes, you have the player, you have the $40,000 and $50,000 player that might be a physical specimen, but soccer-wise, he's lacking. He's lacking because of the environments he came from. He's lacking the culture that he grew up in. So yeah, he is going to run a lot more and play a little bit less soccer on the field. But with time, hopefully, that changes. And versus somebody like himself who doesn't need to be running as much as he does because of what he sees and what he does. And I'll give an example of the coach I work for, Alessandro. He sees things happening, 50 times faster than the average player in MLS. So for him, Yeah, he sees soccer differently and he approaches it completely different.
Absolutely. The next topic I wanted to talk about was recovery in general, and then maybe a few words about what you think about yoga, because Ryan Giggs said that added 4 or 5 years to his career because of being able to do these static poses and whatnot. How do you approach recovery? What is the proper timeline for recovery? What things should players be doing during recovery time?
I think there isn't a one specific way to approach recovery that will be beneficial to each. And again, I'm probably, keeping things very gray, and it's because it is. It's very specific to every athlete. And, yes, some players will benefit definitely from yoga and some mindful exercises, relaxation and stretching. Some players won't, and some players need to be a little bit more active in their recovery. So our approach this past year is in terms of our microcycle is post game the next day is a regen day for those who play, and I will mix activities. That way, it's not always the same thing. Whether it's light movement, whether it's a pool session, whether it's on the bike, whether it's some upper body stuff in the gym. Um,
And
I
how long,
really like to give it to everybody an opportunity to have their way of doing things, part of our full programming.
and how long are the recovery sessions post game usually?
Half an hour,
Half an
half an
hour.
hour. Yeah, even mentally more than that, it's tough to have the players engaged. And
Absolutely.
and then for me, the second day after the game is the day where it's worse in terms of the way they feel, what they're able to accomplish. So usually we give that day off. I mean, there are some that don't go about it that way. Some will give the day off immediately after, and that's something that we're going to explore next season for ourselves because we would love. Our games are so late in the evening. The next day, you would ideally want your regen session to be a little bit later. But here it gets so hot, it's hard to accomplish that. So, you know, what you want to do is give a little bit more sleep and rest, and maybe have your active start day instead of calling it a regen day, and then the following day.
I was just going to ask you about sleep. What is ideal sleep time for an athlete who's had a game the night before?
Most players have a hard time sleeping. If you're finishing a game at 10 p.m., seldom they see players or have players fall asleep between 2 a.m., 3 a.m. thinking about the game, rewatching the game. Um, I've given them stuff to help them go to sleep. There's a protein that has sponsored us. They actually have a higher percentage of tryptophan in their protein that actually helps them relax. Some players find themselves getting in a deeper sleep, so I'm happy to hear that. I know some teams use cherry tart juice. That's another approach.
Yes.
I think it's really important for players to get into a sleep routine and athletes in general. Just your sleep routine leading up to the game and afterwards. So one thing that I discuss with them is screen time. How much are they on
Absolutely.
their phone when they're
Yeah.
in their hotel room, or when they're trying to go to sleep. And if you disrupt that sleep routine, you're going to have a hard time. Working and discussing with a company called Fatigue Science, they showed me some stats on how many hours of sleep are lost in a season. If you're on several road trips. So
Okay.
how does that affect you, in the long term in your training? And I think one of the recent researches came out where I think sleep patterns or sleep quality was number 3 in terms of increasing injury risk. So
Absolutely.
it's very important.
So it's something that's always strange for athletes and parents usually is that when a kid picks up, let's say, a thigh muscle strain, and they hear that they have to have a gradual return to play on a 4 to 6 week basis, this is something strange. How would you explain this to somebody who is not used to this kind of protocol?
For me, the most important thing is get as much information as possible. For us at the professional level, there's no reason why not to image or screen every injury that we get. We have the means. So if the injury is severe enough, I would try to deep as possible. That way you understand what that plan can be, or what it should be. Then in terms of the return to play protocol, one thing that I developed with a friend of mine when we were working together in Montreal, it was let's look at the capacities that need to be reestablished. What are the different elements? And it could be something as simple as when you're talking about change of direction. Change of direction could be done, many different ways. So whether you're looking at a 180-degree turn versus a 45-degree change of direction. So listing those capacities or understanding those capacities as you approach back to full fitness is really important, and really assessing where are you at and how close are you to really actually accomplishing everything that needs to happen on the field.
Absolutely. I'm gonna put you on the hot seat before we get out of here, Coach. In terms of how do we fix Canadian soccer? I mean, that picture is worth 1,000 words. Players coming off the field after that final loss. Lots of passion here, but we haven't been able to produce those results that we're looking for. What do you think are the issues, and how do we resolve them?
I see that picture on the left. That says a lot to me. I was there, so for me, it's easy for people from the outside to say, "Hey, this needs to happen, that needs to happen." I've been there, and there's a lot that needs to happen, and it's not just one thing that will solve or assist us. I think one thing that is our professionalizing of our national teams. To me, one thing that's important is to have more full-time staff, and more full-time staff means coaching staff, means medical staff, it means talent identification staff, and when you have more people invested, when your national federation invests in people, they're going to invest back in that federation and bring back something. It's very easy to spend money on technology and different things, and you think those are going to solve problems or assist you. For me, the best resource is human resource. You need to spend money on people. People create million-dollar ideas and change that will affect you long-term versus something that might be short-term.
What do you think? How important do you think is having a professional league in Canada?
Professional league will be very, very important. I understand the constraints of being a Canadian team in an American league. I think it's very unfair for some of our Canadian players that, if they don't make it in Toronto, and they've already played in Montreal, they have one more chance in Vancouver, otherwise they're a foreign player. For me, that's a little bit unfair, and I feel for the players that I've worked with in the past, and I get their struggle. That's why having something at home, which is not easy to build, because you need, again, like I'm saying about the national programs, you need full-time people, you need full-time dedicated people, people that are qualified, people that have produced players. You need to have that at home so that you can take care of those players. Because the next thing is going to be competition. What is the quality of competition that we can actually provide at that level? So where does that actually fit in to the actual pyramid of play?
Yeah, I think having you've been around the youth program a lot of the provincial players. They our provincial teams do really well even internationally when they go over and play other youth teams. It just seems like the wheels fall off because these kids don't continue to develop at a professional elite level as compared to other countries, it seems.
Exactly. And developing at a professional level is not only the physical and tactical and technical aspect, it's a psychological aspect too. The stress of maybe not being in the 18, the stress of maybe losing your job and going back home. These are things that, and I'll never forget my time in Italy for that, that was a great eye-opener for me. I remember one of the first weeks when the season started, seeing the 17-year-old crying on a Monday, and for me I didn't understand why, and I learned that could have been his last game, and it might have been his last game, and if it was his last game in that level, he was going home, and that's it, and that was another knock on his CV and another lost opportunity. So that's why I think our 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds need to be involved in environments that are, more challenging in terms of their psychology and the psychology as well. And it's easy to make it more challenging when it comes to playing and training. These are things that you can create, but the organic stress of the psychological aspect is a little bit different.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Coach, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. I appreciate you taking the time down south and hooking up with us here with this conversation. I hope you join us again.
I will, and thank you very much.
Not a problem. Again, we're from Kinesis Sports Injury and Rehab. I hope you don't need us in terms of injuries, but if you do, we're just down the street. And of course, in terms of performance training, please do contact us if you do need some information. Once again,
Nice,
Coach Paolo,
nice pictures there. I like your setup.
it's not a bad place, eh?
That looks good.
It's not a bad place. Once again, Coach, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye bye.